How? Come on, Pete.
No.
He just won't do it, will he?
Not doing it. No.
It's Christmas. Come on, Pete. It's Christmas.
Just bring the zebra back for Pete, man, will you?
No to that either.
I'm not allowed to do the zebra. Oh, God. Okay, welcome back.
It's been a while, hasn't it? It's been a while.
It has been a while.
Yeah.
Not planned, but it's been a while. So I don't know about you guys, but I kind of feel like a little bit rejuvenated, a little bit refreshed and hopeful is the word at the moment. Hopeful.
Stick with that, Pete. We like that. Okay, we've got a treat for people tonight. First treat is we have no Martin. Yay! That's a treat in itself. But yeah, the next treat, I was going to say tweet, is we have my favorite podcast. One of the members of that podcast, and just to prove it, On The Tyne, I watch a lot of or listen to a lot of this podcast, so it's one of my favorite ones. So without further ado, let's bring on Mr. Christopher. Well, okay, we've got two Chris's here, so we have kind of decided that we're going to have Chris H is going to be Avon, and Chris W has to be Waffles. So here's Waffles.
Delighted to be introduced as Waffles. What an introduction that was. Evening, everyone.
Evening.
Welcome, Chris. Now, Chris, in your line of work, I know I clicked on your LinkedIn page today, so I saw that you worked at, and I remember some of your stories in the Chronicle, the Journal, the Sunday Sun, and you were plucked from obscurity then, and you joined the Athletic. So. So I guess in that line of work, you get to meet lots of superstars. So my first bring up a picture of some of the superstar that you met in your day to day. So what is it like? Maybe I'll zoom in here to work with Gordon George.
He's gonna love you, Dad.
He is gonna love you. I hope he isn't watching this because I don't want him to ever hear me. I hope he isn't going to be listening either because I don't want him to ever hear me compliment him. But honestly, it's when I was growing up, George was the writer that I really looked up to. And before the Athletic launched, George and I got along. We knew each other, but we weren't that close, to be honest. I mean, we saw each other around about, and we always got along well. But it wasn't like we spoke regularly. We'd see each other from time to time. But George actually was the one who really took a chance on me, and he was asked about when the Athletic was launched who could be the full-time Newcastle United writer, and he proposed to them that they should take a chance on me. And I remember the conversation. I was actually at work at the Chronicle in the centre of Newcastle, and I got a message off George telling me, basically saying, are you in private? Can I speak to you? And at that point, I was thinking, oh, bloody hell, I hope there's nothing wrong. Actually, my immediate reaction was because George was quite close to Rafa Benitez's people. This was before Benitez had left, and I was thinking, have I written something which has really peed them off? I was scratching my head, trying to think. And he sort of called and basically said that he was leaving the Times, and I thought at that point he was going to say, oh, you should apply for the job at the Times. And then he was like, I want you to come with me. And I had no idea what he was talking about. And I met him in Newcastle later that day for a coffee, and it sort of snowballed from there. But no, he can be hard work at times just because of his relentless miserableness. But
the grumpiness,
the grumpiness. But he's absolutely brilliant to work with. He's absolutely top. Brilliant.
Cool. And of course, you work with the fabulous Taylor Payne as well. I don't have a picture of Taylor, but Taylor, if you watch this back, pause it right about now.
Love it.
That would make his day. That would genuinely make his day.
Yes, I'm making a plea to try and get both the lads on at some stage in the future. Yes, hopefully. But okay. And I have another question for you, Chris. Before we get into the I suppose the heart of the matter and football, and the latest comings and goings. But I want to take you back to takeover day? Because I remember you said one of the it must have been one of the podcasts on the time that when you joined up with the Athletic first, that George told you that something big is going to happen. Now you did with regards to the takeover, but you didn't. None of us thought we were going to be waiting 2 years for it. But where were you on the night of the takeover, or when you heard about it first?
Well, yeah, just briefly going back to that moment. So it was before. It was actually that same day that I mentioned before. And when we met for a coffee, George was saying at that stage, "Oh yeah, Staveley is back in." I'd heard murmurings that the Staveley's back in. He said, "Oh, she's definitely back in. She's trying to get finance." At that stage, the Saudis weren't on board. They were still trying to work out exactly what the finances were, but she was putting together the deal, and then we'd have semi-regular updates on a constant basis. And George and I were both sort of roll our eyes each time we heard them. But then Boxing Day 2019 was, for us, that was, this is going to happen. And from that point on, we always thought it was going to happen. And obviously the news then leaked out at the end of January 2020, and it took months on. But in terms of the day when the takeover happened, I was in between moving houses. So I was living actually with my wife's parents at the time, but I was only one in the house. And I was on the phone on a WhatsApp call to one of Alan Saint-Maximin's former youth coaches at the French youth level, and I was speaking pidgin French to him. He was speaking far better English in return. But we were having this conversation, and George kept on calling me. It was about 10:30 in the morning. George kept on calling, and I kept on hanging up. And eventually, he just texted me saying, "Answer the effing phone. You've got to answer the effing phone." So I basically tried to get off this call for this piece I was meant to be doing about Alan Saint-Maximin and this big read on Alan Saint-Maximin. And then George just messaged saying, "It's happening. It's happening." And I was like, what? So I called him back, and he said, "I've just been down to Jesmond Dean House. I've just been in the car with one of the people in and around the consortium. It's happening." At that point, we thought it was going to be happening 4:30 that day. So that was the Wednesday. And so then we were sort of immediately in action, writing different pieces. We'd had pieces prepared for quite a while, but obviously we need to update in terms of specifics of different things. And then you sort of waiting, and then it got pushed back to 6 o'clock. Then it's 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock. Then it turned out to be the next morning. It's going to be 10 o'clock. Then it's going to be 11 o'clock. And it kept going across the course of the day. And then when the takeover eventually happened, I was still basically in the same room. I didn't leave. I mean, for those 2 weeks, I basically did not leave the house because it was just manic in terms of work. It was brilliant, but it was just absolutely manic. So yeah, it was a bizarre 24 hours, and I have very little recollection of what I was doing other than working during that period of time.
Nice one, Chris.
Great stuff. Just to segue into that, obviously, you know, that moment where it all happened. What are your sort of assessments now? You know, are we about 7 weeks on from the takeover happening? The consortium's in, Charlie's gone, Ashley's gone, Bruce is gone. How do you assess their sort of first 7 weeks in office? I'm talking like they're the president, but they're not. But they feel like they are to us as Newcastle fans. But how do you kind of assess their early start in the new era?
I think they've spoken extremely well, and I think that they've made a wonderful first impression in that regard. I think they were always going to have a honeymoon period, but I think that they've said all the right things, and I mean that both externally and internally. People have been very impressed with the way they've gone about work. There's been individual meetings with different departments. There's going to be individual meetings with specific members of staff, and so they are promising certain things. They are listening as well as talking, which I think is so important. And when you see them at matches, Mia Gadusi was there on Tuesday night. Staveley wasn't because she was at the Premier League meeting, but Gadusi was, and he came down just in front of the press box at one stage, and he's going around and he speaks to people, he listens to them, he has that communication. So in that sense, I think they've done very, very well. I think in terms of decision-making and process and the way that things have gone on, there have been teething problems. There were always going to be teething problems. And I think that the lack of sort of footballing expertise has sort of shone through. I know Jamie Rubin was on the board at QPR, and I think that he has managed to provide some sort of insight. But the footballing world is very insular. And when you try to break into that from outside, people make it difficult for you. And I think that they've experienced that. I think they've had it where it hasn't necessarily been as smooth as they would have liked. We all know about Unai Emery. We all know about the situation with Steve Bruce, where I think the British-based owners were keen to get rid of him immediately. It took longer than they would have liked for that to happen, and unfortunately, he was there for that first game. It took a bit longer. And getting a sporting director, getting Lee Charnley transition into to getting a CEO has taken longer than I think everyone would ideally like. So I think that it's been slower in terms of the change of pace of everything at the club, but equally I think that's partly because they were inexperienced in football, not learning on the job, and people are maybe necessarily not wanting to work with them at other clubs. But B, they've also come into a club which was really a complete shell in many ways. The job is astronomical. They always knew it was going to be big, but until you get on the inside and see what exactly you don't have rather than what you do have is the main issue. And I think that they've realised that, and it's working out what you do first and the process that you need. And nobody else has really been through this. Other clubs haven't really been through this. Man City are probably the closest you've got to someone who's trying to grow so quickly and from such a low base. And Newcastle, it's a very different situation to most other environments. And so unless you'd had someone involved in the very early stages of Man City, there's nobody, even in football, who's really been through this before. So finding those right people to be the CEO, to be the director of football is a difficult job. And I think they're finding that. So if you were to say for me to mark them, I'd probably give them a sort of B+. I think that they've spoken very well. And now it's about putting those words into action.
What's it been like for the media now, though, Chris, going from the previous regime to the new regime? What's that like being the transition being on a professional basis as well?
It's been bizarre in many ways because we've gone from being sort of enemy number one with the club and sort of having no relationship in terms of, obviously we'd ring up on a professional basis and check things out, but it would be antagonistic really both ways. If I'm perfectly honest, I got to the stage where it became both ways because it was so frustrating too. Suddenly there is a sort of, the media is embraced and there is a willingness to communicate and to talk and to try and get things out there. And maybe sometimes people would argue that the too much went out there early on, too many quote unquote briefings, if you want to call it that, or information that went out there. And I think that maybe that they've learned a little bit from that in terms of Steve Bruce. Certain quarters, people were writing that he was going to go at the very first stage. And obviously that didn't end up happening, but that was the intention, and that sort of leaked out. And I think the same with Unai Emery, although to be fair on them, I don't think that was them. I don't believe that. And the problem I'd say from them, from a media point of view, is because there's so many elements to this consortium, because there's so many people advising them as well, information creeps out from a lot of different quarters, and there's all of it. There's different levels of how much sort of not truth, because all of it comes from a basis, but how much it's likely to happen. And so all these players being linked left, right, and centre. You'll have agents coming saying, "Oh, do you want to buy such and such a player?" And so the player gets put towards Newcastle. So they have had that player put towards them. Does that mean they're interested in them, even if they said, "Oh, well, we'll think about it"? That's what's very difficult when it comes to things like transfer rumours. But in terms of dealing with the club, I mean, for example, my first 2 years at the Athletic, I didn't get a single player interview out of Newcastle United, despite asking on a regular basis. I had an interview with Joe Willock yesterday, which is going to go up, and I'm off next week, so it's going to be going up the week after. But to actually have that and to have them embrace that and to actually be willing to do those sorts of conversations, it's a start. But we're moving towards things like that. So yeah, it's been good in that sense. But I also think that there has to be a balance from both the media and the club to realise that we are, in theory, the way I like to look at it is critical friends. And if things aren't going right, if things are incorrect, I will write that. But equally, I'm willing to praise and I'm willing to give them that olive branch that we didn't have previously because of the hopefully positive direction the club can head in.
I think Eddie Howe brought that up in the press conference today. That he says you've been kind to him so far, so he's aware that it can change because obviously previous roles, and no doubt with the fan base and the media that we've got up here, that will change at some point. If results keep going the way they have been, this honeymoon period could change a little bit, and it would be nice to see how they're going to react to that, rather than the consortium in general, but also the new management team and also the players as well, because at the moment everybody's behind the team, which is how we want it to be. But it would be interesting to see what would happen if it does get a bit ugly down, a few weeks down the road, if things don't improve on the pitch.
It would be. I mean, I've said this previously, but it's strange from my point of view of sort of writing about the club, because it's gone from a period of quite justifiable, endless negativity completely endless negativity, just building it. Remember back to the Wolves game and how low everything felt and how terrible everything felt at that stage and almost apathetic to a certain degree, to now it is almost like relentless optimism. They still haven't won a game. They are bottom of the Premier League. They didn't beat Norwich at home. They haven't beaten Brentford at home. They haven't beaten Southampton at home. They haven't beaten Leeds at home. They're in this really, really difficult position. And yet everyone, or at least the vast majority of people, still seem to have this optimism about things going on. Actually, just to address that, I saw one of the questions going up there. It was asked about my article that I wrote from the game the other day. Did I write the headline, which was about fans? I did not write the headline. I do not write the headlines. As you rightly said in the piece, it wasn't really about fans itself. I didn't write that headline. I didn't think personally it really did reflect that necessarily what I'd written. So, because it wasn't meant that Newcastle fans was my piece was basically about realism and about the situation that Newcastle are actually in, and almost countering that to a certain extent, the sort of relentless optimism that there is amongst Newcastle fans, which is excellent and is brilliant to see. And it was brilliant to be inside the stadium on Tuesday night and just to hear everyone behind the team. But actually, if you take a step back and you look at it from someone externally, they'll probably look at it and think, "Oh, why are you so optimistic?" And I know it's about more than just this season; it's about the future and everything like that. But in terms of the here and now, in terms of Newcastle's position in the Premier League, they're in big, big trouble.
Do you also think it's because, you look at the way that things have been on the pitch and there's mitigating circumstances to why there's still that optimism there? Like everyone still thinks we probably would have beat Norwich on Tuesday if Clark had made it after 9 minutes. You go back to the previous home game against Brentford and you think, well, Carl Darlow 9 times out of 10 would probably save that first shot that went straight through. And so do you think it's people are looking, the stuff going against Newcastle and that's why things are so optimistic still around the club?
I think potentially, yeah. Although, I mean, my counter that game would be, but that to me is almost more alarming because there are situations which are going against Newcastle. It's like go back to the 2015-16 season, the amount of times where I would interview Steve McLaren after a game and he'd say about how they were unlucky not to get something from a match. And to a large extent, in the balance of playing a lot of those games, you couldn't really disagree with them. But the reality was they weren't winning those matches. And so at some point, you can't just say that you can't just retain that optimism of, well, it should have been different because it wasn't different. Kieran Clark made the mistake. Kieran Clark then got sent off. That they are issues that he's made. They have shortcomings on his part. It was a shortcoming on Carl Darlow's part that the goal went in the other week. I think part of the reason why there's still optimism is because it is different in terms of it's a different setup of the club and also a different Eddie Howe has come in and already you've seen a different approach to the way that they're trying to do things. You can see what he's attempting to do. And although defensively they look no better really than previously Norwich aside, but I think that's a game you have to take out of context for those very reasons you said. What they're trying to do going forward, players suddenly looking far better and improving and talking about being fitter. I think all of that plays into this. And after 2 years of people being worn down by watching Steve Bruce's team labour through matches, suddenly having that fresh approach, someone coming in looking at this side differently, I think that's part of the reason why there's so much optimism still lingering around.
I was going to ask the same kind of question, Richie. I was going to ask it a different way. It was if you look back to the 5 key games, it was in the Chronicle, so I kind of borrowed the picture. Lascelles and the penalty in the 96th minute, the foul on Armstrong. Murphy, the miss, the little dink that didn't go in. All these ended in draws, by the way, against Watford. Sanchez, the sending off. And we all remember Dunk going in goal and Shelby not shooting. Another shout out there, Taylor, to you on that one. Then Joe Linton and slipping after doing a nice little run and slipping against Brentford, and as we all just mentioned there, Clark. So my question I was going to put at Richie was, are we cursed? All these things happen, and where does that lead us into the game against Burnley? Is it going to be another draw? Who's going to be the fall guy this time?
Well, I mean, you do sometimes worry that it feels like a season that's faded, because if you go back to the very start of it, I mean, they had a situation where they had to name 4 goalkeepers in their squad because Carl Darlow had COVID, Martin Dubravka gets injured, so you immediately upset the balance of what you want to do. They didn't sign the players they really needed to sign. You've mentioned all those incidents already. You had Eddie Howe for the Brentford game, that huge, his first match as Newcastle United head coach, and he can't be there because he gets COVID. So many different things like that where it just feels like they are adding up, and just this endless number of issues which are just holding them back. But I was really impressed actually with Eddie Howe today when he spoke about that, when he spoke about Clark the other day, and he basically said we could have had a victim mentality, but we don't. We have to fight through this, and he was basically saying we make our own luck, and although luck seems to more go your way if things are going well, I just found that change from the head coach. I think a lot of other fans have spoken about as well, is that it's gone from sort of Steve Bruce regularly talking up the opposition and talking about the limitations of his side. Eddie Howe's gone to the other extreme, and I mean, I spoke to an ex-Newcastle player today who described it as if you listen to Eddie Howe, you'd think that Newcastle had the best squad in the world when he talks about some of the players. I mean, he's talking about Joe Linton today, talking about how wonderful he is, and he's talking about Jamal Lascelles and Fernandez and all these players, but that having that someone with that positivity, I think that is rubbing off on the players, and the fact that he isn't looking at Burnley and saying looking back, at Norwich and saying we have to feel sorry for ourselves. We had this game. Newcastle got themselves in that situation because their centre back got himself sent off, and so they need to correct those errors tomorrow. They need to go into the match with positivity and believe they can win, not believe everything's against them. And so I hope that mindset that he is relentlessly pushing is rubbing off on the players, and listening to them and seeing their body language. I do think that it is, and so I hope sooner rather or later turns around, because I think if they win tomorrow, that gives them some belated momentum going into a very difficult rest of December, and keeps them in touch, gives them a bit of a chance. And so tomorrow, in that sense, for me is huge. I thought they had to win on Tuesday. Results apart from Leeds sort of went just about for them in midweek, and gives them that opportunity to. There's only 9 points separate the whole of the bottom half of the table. The issue from Newcastle is that 3 points separate them from the next two teams, and 6 points separates them from safety. There's a very short gap between 11th and 16th, and Newcastle have to make sure they get back into touch with those teams, just to make them look over their shoulder again and start worrying about Newcastle.
But that's the key, is that if you look at some of those teams in and around us, they've had a run of form, or where they've picked up a number of wins. We haven't had that run yet. And that's the thing that kind of gives us as fans a little bit of hope, that we are still yet to have that run. And as we can see from last season with Fulham, for example, all it needed is a run of 3 or 4 games and 3 or 4 wins, or 3 or 4 wins in 6-7 games. And it just opens things up. So as long as we stay in touch with those teams, I've always been of the mindset, if we can get in and around those teams and be anywhere between 15 to 18 points by Christmas. And I know that's kind of a long shot now with some of the results that have gone against us. But if we can still be in touching distance by January, and we invest and improve the team, because any player that we bring in is going to be significantly better than what we've already got. So it will improve the team. And if we can do that, I do believe in the turnaround fixtures where we've got Watford to come to us. We've got Villa to come to us. We've got Southampton away. We've got these games in the turnaround with a better squad available to us. They're games that then become games that we could potentially win, particularly with Eddie Howe building then a team and bringing in players that are built around his philosophy. So I still hold the hope regardless of the situation, because we're not like a Sheffield United or some of the teams in the past, that we have got talented players, and we've now got a manager that can get these guys playing, and we've already seen a little glimpse of that. And the one thing I mentioned before I sort of raised my second point is that Eddie Howe does have a knack of beating teams that he's not expected to beat. So we're looking on paper, and we're looking at these games coming up with Leicester away, Everton away, Man United at home, Man City at home. And, I think Chris alluded to the point, he made a really good point on away days, that actually, who's to say that just because on paper they're better teams than us, that we're not going to get one of those results? And I completely agree with, sorry, not Chris, Avon.
Didn't know who you're talking about there.
Sorry, I got confused there. But yeah, the point still stands. I think you made a really good point. But I just wanted to talk about, just really, really quickly, about your point with regards to Eddie Howe, because he has been so positive, and it's such a change. I used to watch Bruce's presses all the time through gritted teeth, and normally when I was trying to get to sleep at night, I'd stick it on, and it's so different. It's like night and day the way that Eddie Howe talks. I was on my break today at work, and I put the interview on, and he's so positive. so positive. The way he talked about Joe Linton, the way he talked about Jamal Lascelles, which may be controversial to some fans who don't particularly rate him, but the way he was positive about him as a captain, but also as a player, talked about his raw abilities. I just thought that was fantastic. And it kind of like, you know, your other point that you made about how we're still losing games, but things are so positive at the moment. I was at the Emirates on Saturday, and I was one of those fans that was, you know, singing Eddie Howe's Black and White Army, and you know, we came over and we were just, we were just completely just besotted with Eddie Howe, and just regardless of the fact that we'd lost 2-0, we loved him. You could hear the fans talking about Eddie Howe and how much love that they have for him, because they could see what he's bringing to the club. And we walked out the away end, and you could hear the Arsenal fans saying, like, why were they chanting so much? Like, why they've just lost 2-0? Like, it's not normal to them. And I remember it when we lost 5-0, you know, against Leicester away. I'm from Leicester myself, but I was in the away end, and I was walking back to my car, and it was the same thing. From 60 minutes onwards, there was just nothing but chanting. Opposition fans don't understand it, and that's why we're so unique as a fan base. Is because we are just completely just devoted and loyal to our club, no matter what, and even more so now with Eddie Howe at the helm.
Yeah, they are, and I mean, I was at the Arsenal game as well, and I'd gone down the day before, and I was exchanging messages with so many fans, both on social media and sort of via WhatsApp and things. And the number of them who, despite the fact that it looked like they couldn't get down to London, were trying by all means to make sure that they were going to be there for that game. They basically said, even if we get there and we can't get in for the game because we don't get there on time, we're going to try. We're going to go and do that. And I mean, I just imagine that fans of other clubs just wouldn't even bother doing it. That dedication to want to do it. And then fans were still, the majority managed to get there very early in the game, but there was some streaming in still with 20, 30 minutes gone. And just because they wanted to be there for that occasion, and as you say, they sang, even though Newcastle were never really in the match. And certainly once they fell behind, we're never going to get back into it. And there was how went across and received that wonderful reception. And then the reception that him and the players got on Tuesday as well, after the game, the way that fans stuck with them was really, and I know that was partly the context of the match that 10 men had stuck with it, but really that was a terrible result for Newcastle in the context of this season. If you'd gone into it before the game and said you'll draw 1-1 with Norwich, that isn't good enough in what terms of what Newcastle need at home. And yet they're sticking with them. And as you say, I think that they've got, Newcastle fans have something to believe in again, and there's two layers of that. There's first of all, there's the takeover, and that brought back hope. And then there's Eddie Howe, this belief that things can and will be different, that the team doesn't have to just play in this way where there's a formation they're going to use for a little bit of time, but really the manager doesn't really believe in what he's trying to do, and he'll change it in a few weeks. It's just because it's worked for a little while. Whereas Eddie Howe has a philosophy, has an idea of what he wants to do. And I think that beyond even just the positivity, what is impressive about him in press conferences is he also speaks with detail. When you mentioned what he talked about with Joe Linton today, he spoke about what he sees in him and what he wants from him, what he expects him to do and what he thinks he can do, rather than just saying, oh, you know, Big Joe, he's here and he's had a bit of a hard time, but we still believe in him. He's actually saying he's technically good, he's tactically very good, he can lead the press, all these certain elements of it. And what I found very interesting was on his first pre-match press conference against before the Brentford game, just before he ended up getting COVID. He did a press conference in the morning, and he's very. There's a sort of Rafa Benitez like element to him in a press conference, whereby he will say what he wants to say, and he will stick to the message, and he will not deviate from it. But he was asked a question about players and who'd impressed him sort of on the training ground. And he specifically mentioned John Joe Shelvey. Now, he doesn't usually specifically mention players unless he wants to. And it was clear to me that he wanted to get that message out there because there'd been a lot of stuff before that, leading up to the first fortnight of him being here. A lot of fans on social media, just quite understandably to a certain extent, going, oh, well, this will be John Joe Shelvey finish because he doesn't work off the ball. He won't like him. And I think that he wanted to get that message across. That, look, John Joe Shelvey is going to be an important member of this team. He didn't want to wait until 2:00 on the Saturday when the team sheet's announced and fans are going, oh, well, John Joe Shelvey's in it. Get the message out there that he is important. Get behind him. He's going to play a role. And I think that that's been justified. I think John Joe Shelvey has been one of the best players over the last few games. You can see what he is bringing, how he is trying to use them. And that for me, has been impressive as well, seeing those sorts of elements of how he's worked.
I agree.
Yeah,
100%.
He's getting the best out of the players we have, because he has no choice for the next couple of weeks. But no, it's
Chris,
working.
Sorry, Chris. I had a quick question for you as well. Now we're talking about the squad, and January round the corner. In your opinion, Chris, what positions, not necessarily players, but what positions, bearing in mind we're probably only, I would imagine, probably only going to bring 3 or 4 in January, because as we all know, January is a particularly difficult window when you're trying to, bring players in. No doubt now that we are the richest club in the world, we're going to see a lot of inflated prices. We're going to see a lot of clubs refusing to sell to us, which we've already heard about. But what 3 or 4 positions do you feel personally that Eddie Howe may look to improve, or on the other hand, what would you look to improve if you were Eddie Howe?
Well, there is work going on in the background to do with transfers. I think Howe is sort of leaving that to the ownership team to deal with that, and it's not ideal because there isn't a director of football in place. But they are working, they are trying to get things in place so it can be early in the window. And I know it's proven very difficult here because for all the reasons that you've mentioned, but also because of the position Newcastle are in. It's different. I think a lot of players are looking at it, or agents of players are looking at it and sort of saying, "Well, give it a few weeks and let's see where you are by that stage." But in terms of the positions that both and I know that Eddie Howe is looking at, fullbacks are very important to the way Eddie Howe wants to play, and fullbacks, he would like some fullbacks in. I mean, I think that we saw from Lewis what he could potentially bring and how he's going to work with him, and does believe that there's a player there, but I think he'd like greater options there in terms of he wants at Bournemouth. Basically, everything went through his fullbacks. His fullbacks would regularly have the most touches of the players on the pitch. They would underlap and overlap the wingers, who tended to be inverted wingers when he played there. And so fullback, certainly. Central defence, he would like a quicker central defender, someone who's a bit more comfortable on the ball as well. It was no surprise when Cher came into the team earlier, and he was the only international, remember, who had been away on international duty, who came into that team for the first game, and that's because he wants a ball player and they want somewhere who's a little bit more comfortable. And so ideally, I think he likes someone there. And also centre midfield, someone with a bit more sort of physicality, someone who can dominate a little bit more, give Newcastle a base from which to play off. I think he wants someone who's maybe a little bit more technically gifted than the sort of destroyer you might just describe someone like Isaac Hayden as. I think that's why we haven't seen Hayden so much early on now. I think that he would like someone who's a little bit more, not quite box to box, but in terms of just can get around the pitch a little bit more in a physical sort of sense, but has a bit more about him on the ball. So they're the 3 positions I think he's identified early on as being ideal. Ideally, he'd like more, but I think that they're the 3 positions that they're most likely to try and target early on.
Do you see, Chris, as well? Do you see Dwight Gale getting a chance? I know, and that first video that we were all waiting for, that training video, and that was the funny thing, wasn't it? As fans, like when we saw the training video, we were like, "Oh my god!" Like the players are getting coached. Like there was like a big furore over it, wasn't it? Everyone was made up with it. But I remember seeing, he was doing work with Dwight Gale, and obviously Dwight Gale's kind of been on the fringes, and Bruce bigged him up when he joined and said, I've been after Dwight Gale for so long and it's great to work with him. And then he just disappears again. Do you see Dwight Gale being given a chance, or do you think that his days are numbered?
I think that he will be. I think he has a chance of being given a chance. That sounds ridiculous. Sorry, to use that term. But take a chance. Howe sort of spoke about this today, and he raised the point, which a lot of people, he's a very similar player to Callum Wilson. As long as Callum Wilson's in the team, I think that he will be first choice. But we know Callum Wilson's injury record means that the likelihood is he's probably going to pick up a nick here or there. And over the festive period, although to be fair, the festive period isn't actually as packed this year as it usually is. There aren't as many games because Christmas is on a weekend. It actually means the fixture list is a little bit more spread out. There's 8 days between Newcastle's pre-Christmas game and the play on the 27th. So I think as long as Wilson's fit, it's unlikely that Gale is going to start many games. But given the other business Newcastle need to do in January, I think they'd be reluctant to let Gale go unless they knew they were definitely going to bring a forward in. And although they'd be open to bringing in a forward, I don't think that's going to be the priority in terms of the positions. So I can see him featuring, and particularly if Wilson gets injured, I don't think that Gale is going to be someone who starts week in, week out, as long as Wilson's in the team. But I think that as a backup forward, as someone who's sort of like Wilson, I don't think he's quite as good an all-round sort of forward, but in terms of as a pure finisher and someone who can lead the line in that sense, I can see him being the deputy and getting more of an opportunity in the boost. I'd be surprised if Wilson was to get injured and Gale was not to feature in the way that he did in the boost. I'd be surprised if Howe suddenly went to having no strikers in the team. I don't see that happening.
No, I agree.
Someone asking, Dan is asking there, is Dummett still injured? Any update on Dummett, Chris?
He's been back on the grass the last couple of weeks. The last I heard, which was a few days ago, was that there's hope he might be back in the next week or two, back in contention, which would give them another option in a back four. I'm not sure how much someone like Paul Dummett would feature in any Howe side, because I think he's probably a little bit too limited going forward. But it gives them more of an option. I think he's probably the best option they can have when he's fully fit as a left-sided centre half, because he gives a little bit more balance. And I also think Jamal Lascelles plays better when he has someone like Paul Dummett alongside him, and just the flexibility that Dummett would give you, and certainly late on in matches, being able to bring him on if you did have, say, Lewis as your actual left back, and then bring on as your offensive left back, and then you needed someone to shore it up a little bit, Paul Dummett. So I think that we're just hopefully not too far away from featuring maybe at some point over December. He's had an awful run with injuries, and it's been a struggle for him to get back this time. He had a relapse of it earlier in the year as well. So fingers crossed it's not too far and he'll be back.
I might take this moment, lads, just to mention the sponsor. So shout out to Black and White Army. Bronwyn has kicked off it's open. Her website is open. Actually, I'll bring it up here and show you guys. It is live. It was live since the 1st of December. She's arranged. Then this is a limited edition collection, and you can get everything you see here. You can get in different colors, apart from the denim jacket that still comes in denim. But yeah, it's all live, and the that wasn't meant to be funny.
It definitely was there.
It was class.
But just to let you know that all the profits from the month of December go towards the food bank, so that's great. So get on there, and the web address is scrolling across the bottom of the screen. So check it out. Pick up some Christmas presents. So that's Black and White Army, and yeah, I think she's going to rebrand to a different name after Christmas or so. So keep an eye on that. Let's actually, before we talk about Burnley, let's talk, because I know it was one of the questions that came up in the comments as well, about the director of football. So, Mr. Waffles, because I don't want to confuse the matter with the Chris's. Is there any news on director of football? We've heard a lot of talk about this man, and I even learned how to pronounce his name, Michael Imanalo.
Are you sure that's not Lawrence Fishburne?
No, not Lawrence Fishburne. He was a linked.
It looks like November as well.
Yeah,
it does actually. He's not wearing the tux though.
Yeah.
But any news on the director of football, Chris? Or as some people are saying, are people waiting to? Are the consortium waiting till Rafa gets the boot from Everton and then wander in and take that role? But yeah, what's your thoughts on that?
I don't think Rafa Benitez is ready to be a director of football. I think he's too hands-on to be that. He'd want to be on the touchline, so I can't see that one happening. Maybe, stranger things happen, I suppose, but I think it would be a strange dynamic in terms of the director of football. There has been a lot of work on it. The latest suggestion was maybe that actually a CEO might come in before a director of football. That there has been a lot of work on what they on who they're looking at, and there's been a lot of interviews done. There's been a lot of conversations had. There's been board meetings even this week from Newcastle board meetings to sort of discuss some of the sort of people that they're speaking to and looking at. The issue again with this, like to an extent there was with the head coach searches, that you've got three elements of the consortium, and all of them have different ideas. All of them are different. It's being led by Mirdad Gadusi and Amanda Stavely in terms of the interview process and things that are happening there, but then eventual sign-off will have to come primarily from PIF, because they are the 80% sort of stakeholders, and obviously it's a very important position. I mean, we talk about director of football, and I'm not sure yet whether they've even decided on what the exact title is going to be of that role. We say director of football. It could be technical director. It could be various other titles which are used in other football director. Different places have different sort of titles for this, and then that'll depend on what the structure is going to be below. And so there's been a big since they've come in, there's been an audit done, and they've been looking at exactly how they want to build that going forward. They had some ideas before they came in, but then seeing things sort of internally. So Emanalo is definitely someone who has been spoken to and who is liked by at least certain elements of the consortium. I think that he would be keen, given the right parameters for the job, but there are other people who have other ideas about what they might want. So David Ornstein, my colleague at The Athletic, wrote this week that it's looking like it may even be January or beyond. And I think it gets to a stage where you probably have to look at it and say, if you're not 100% sure on the person or if you know who the person is you want to bring in, then rather getting them in during January, maybe it's better than to wait till after January, because that could just complicate matters. If you're going in with a strategy for January that you are deciding without the director of football or whoever it may be in place, then maybe you wait until afterwards and you see who you've managed to get in, and B, see where you are. Because I think that the issue that you will have that they will counter with a lot of these situations is, if you're a director of football, or if you're at another club, you may be looking and thinking, well, do I want to spend what might be a season, could even be longer, obviously, hopefully not, but do I want to spend a season in the Championship, which is the situation Newcastle are in now as well. So I think waiting to see who is attainable, and maybe some of the more ambitious names that they've got, maybe they need to wait and see what sort of division they're in. So the short answer to that question is, I don't think they're that close.
Chris, do you think one of the reasons why they possibly switched to CEO rather than director of football, sport director, whichever way you want to call it, is because we're probably going to be looking for more experienced Premier League players in January to get us out of the mess that we're in, rather than sprawling the foreign market as such, where the director of football may have more of a pull, look on the overseas, whereas Eddie Howe tends to know the English market really well, the players he'd want, who would fit the molds and stuff like that. Do you think that's probably a way of thinking that the club are looking at now?
I'm not sure if that's necessarily influencing that in itself. I mean, I know Eddie Howe ideally would like Premier League experience, but Newcastle, I think, are going into this window with an open mind. They do have domestic targets in mind, but they also have backup options sort of from the continent, in the realization that it might be too difficult, too expensive to do some business with some domestic clubs. I think the CEO element is because really what they need someone in place day to day to run the club. As I said before, Staveley and Caducey, that this is not what they're experiencing. They haven't dealt with the minutiae of what comes with running a club like that. So if they can get an experienced CEO in, someone who's dealt with other clubs, who knows how the football world works, who has those contacts already in terms of within the game, who can come in and say, although Newcastle's owners are doing their own audit, if you have a CEO coming in, particularly if they're from a big club, they can come in and say, well, we need to do X, Y, and Z, and this is the order we need to do them in. We need that in place first. We need that in place next. You can wait to do that until this is the most important thing we have to do. And so that's why I think, particularly since they actually have lost Lee Charney and he has left the club, he was the only director that Newcastle had previously. He was the only sort of quote unquote, for want of a better term, expert Newcastle had in there, someone who dealt with all these people who had those contacts, and he is no longer there. They don't have someone who's been in those Premier League meetings over the course of the last few years. Amanda Staveley is representing them at the minute. She's sort of learning on the job. So I think that's part of the reason why they need a CEO in place. I think the way that the business is being done, maybe with other clubs and with agents, or the sort of comments within the game as well, as they could do with someone who understands how all this works and who they already have that relationship with. So I think that's why that maybe is taking a little bit of precedence.
And ultimately, I think Jeff made a good point. He just said, "Hey, they need someone to make a decision about the money." Like you said, that they've not got the experience on going out and signing players, and the one thing we don't want to do is do what the likes of Everton have done. Everton, over a 5-6 year period, have spent near enough the best part of £500 million. On players, and they're still no better off than where they wanted to be. Yeah. You had the likes of Klassen come in and Wayne Rooney and various other players that have come in, Theo Walcott, and they've not moved on. And I think and I hope that they've got that in mind, that the money that they're going to spend is going to be on the players that are really going to push us up, and not just going to pay the going rate just for the sake of it and get players in. And you can kind of see that from the ownership already. They are very calculated, and they are taking their time on making decisions. And although it's frustrating for us as fans, and I imagine the media as well, because there's nothing, I imagine for you, Chris, there's nothing better than reporting on people coming into the club, new managers, directors of football, players coming in. And it's an exciting time and lots to write about. So, but they want to do it properly. And that's what we've always said, as a channel ourselves. All 5 of us have been of the mindset that, look, this change has been wanted for 14 years. It's now happened. We've just got to be patient a little bit more, let it all play out, and let them be able to, rebuild, should we say, the club. Because they've not had a summer to be able to make these signings, and to getting these people in over the summer period would have been a lot easier, because we've all been on a level playing field, and coming into a mid-season where there's not playing well, bottom of the league, it does have a massive impact on who comes in, whether it's playing staff or staff from above. So it's going to be really, really interesting how it kind of all unfolds, in my opinion. All the signings, I remember me, Richie, I having a chat about this early on. We had Insignia, we had so many other players that we were linked with. Coutinho potentially coming in, playing alongside Immobile up top, in January. And this was obviously early days, first 24, 48 hours of the takeover. But I think the realization of where we are right now means that the signings are going to be slightly different. But just to quickly mention, as we mentioned before we went live, we had our away days just before this show, and we were talking to the Burnley fan Dan, who was fantastic, really, really nice guy, and me and Chris had we talked the topic of Tarkowski, because he obviously is a player that we've been heavily linked with right from the beginning of the takeover, and he seemed to think, and I don't know, whether you can sort of let us know any sort of thoughts from your point of view. He seemed to think that there's a high chance that he could potentially leave. And when Chris pressed him on a price, he said potentially around the sort of 7 million mark. And that kind of shocked me, because I thought we'd maybe have to pay a little bit more.
Is he do the deal then? You should have done the deal then, Pete. You should have signed off.
Should have sealed it.
Yeah, I wish I could have, because he's a talented player. International. As I mentioned on the show before, it wasn't only a couple of years ago that they turned down 35 million, nearly 40 million for him from Leicester City. He's
to replace Maguire.
Yeah, when they sold him off. So, Chris, is he a realistic target? Is he anyone that you've heard about? Is that something that could likely be done already?
I don't really want to pee on everyone's chips. He is a realistic target in the sense that he is someone that they like. He is someone that they see is that Premier League experience could come in and could immediately improve the defence. And I think he was liked before Eddie Howe came in. I wouldn't say he's an archetypal Eddie Howe sort of centre-back, but I think that Eddie Howe recognises what he could bring in. But in terms of that and being available for 7 million, that doesn't really tally with the sort of things I've heard. I mean, I hope I'm wrong, and I hope that information is correct, because I think it would be a very good sign for Newcastle. But all of the indications I've been getting and our Burnley correspondent have been getting is that Burnley will not sell to Newcastle or to anyone in January, certainly on the relegation rivals, because for them, keeping Tarkowski and potentially keeping them in the Premier League or selling them for £7 million and then going down at the expense of Newcastle just is not worth it for them. So, I mean, Newcastle may test the resolve and go in with a very high bid. I haven't heard that that's the case. I'm not saying that will happen, I'm saying that they could try and test the resolve, but I'd be shocked if Burnley let him go to Newcastle for a knockdown price, given their close proximity in the table and given how important a player he is for them. I think that Burnley would rather lose him for free next summer than let him go to one of their relegation rivals and potentially be made to pay for that.
I think that's one of the reasons why. I think that's one of the reasons why when we just did a show about a month or so ago, Pete, when we said about Tarkowski, we thought possibly a 10 to 15 million bid would probably prize him away because he's in his last 6 months of his contract, and obviously there's the risk of going away. But also, it's like, as Chris just mentioned there, and it's a good point, he's that sort of player who could potentially keep Burnley in the league as well, which is worth more to them down, in the long run. So, but I think it also proves that he's the sort of player that we can shop around for with Premier League experience, last 6 months, the year of the contract, whatever. So you don't necessarily need to be paying over the odds necessarily, and getting and doing yourself like an Everton, as we touched on previously.
Well, the idea with Newcastle as well, I think this sometimes it's been forgotten about, but the idea from the owners is that this is not, they are the quote unquote richest club in the world in theory, but they're not coming into this with the intention of just throwing money at it willy-nilly. There is a business element to this, and there is a lot of that they're looking at for January and next summer of players who are in the last 6 or 18 months of their contract, both at home and abroad, because in theory you're getting a higher quality player for a lower price, because there's the risk to a club that they could leave for free in the summer. So I think Newcastle will be looking at pre-contract as well for next summer, or looking to get agreements in place, particularly if they are going to survive in that element. So I don't think that, at least every indication I'm getting is that Newcastle aren't going to go and sign 5 £30 million players in January. If they sign a few players, I don't think it's going to be for astronomical fees. They want players who are going to bolster the squad, but then they're not going to be going and suddenly trying to prize sort of someone who is in the I was going to say Everton there, but they're struggling. Someone who's in the top half of the table. Well, one of the Crystal Palace's first choice players who they don't want to let go of, who's got 4 years left in his contract. I can't see Newcastle going and signing someone like that. I just don't think that that's likely, unless it's a position that definitely identify this is the one position we're going to go and spend a lot of money in January. I don't see it being in every position.
I think that's one of the reasons why some of the national pundits on like TalkSport and Sky Sports, when you hear about them saying, "Oh, they'll be spending 200 million in January." So I think any realistic Newcastle fan realizes we will not be spending 200 million in January. I think we'll probably realistic. If at a push, we might spend 50, 60 tops, in my opinion, because I do think because of the position we're in. We'll probably be doing loans with the option to buy the end of the season, because we don't want to be tying someone into an expensive contract. And touch wood, it doesn't happen. But if the worst comes to worst, we do get relegated. We don't want to be keeping someone in who hasn't brought in a relegation clause in his contract. We'll pay astronomical wages, for however long we're in the championship. You know what I mean? So I think I can't say spend anywhere in. I think that just goes to show how much out of touch all these national pundits and media outlets are about the situation at Newcastle.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I think that you're right. I think a lot's just being said and written, and it's the easy stuff. Sorry, go quote unquote richest club in the world. Oh well, they're just going to go and splurge loads of money in January, and thankfully, most Newcastle fans are far better informed of that and know the situation and realise that isn't the case. And so, because you mentioned in terms of sort of relegation clauses and things like that. Well, I know that at least some sort of agents are sort of proposing the idea that if Newcastle were to sign a player for X value, that then maybe a third of that value that they'd be worth if they were to go down, that they'd have a release clause for that sort of value. So Newcastle are trying to be careful in that sense as well, but also the loan with the option or obligation to buy if they survive is also potentially not just beneficial for Newcastle, but also to players who may come in, because it may give them more security. And whereas if they're coming in on a permanent basis, they might think, well, there is a good chance Newcastle go down. Whereas if it's on a loan with an option or obligation to buy, if Newcastle survive, then that player may feel more security of still being in the Premier League going forward. So I think you will see some interesting deals like that. There'll be some quite complex deals, I think, agreed, and the way Newcastle are they're going to have to be flexible in the market. They're going to have to move from time to time, and I know things are changing daily because of that. Some targets are proven attainable and some unattainable now, and that's always the case in January, but even more so for Newcastle given the position that they're in.
Cool. But I guess that's none of us know. We don't know. We don't know what to expect here. We're in the unknown. We'll just have to see and that's the great thing about this. Even though we are bottom of the table, we haven't won a game. We don't know what's around the corner. We don't know. Someone could mess up tomorrow, and the curse could continue, or we could get our first win, and it'll set us on a march, and with a bit of momentum, and then pick up a few points, and who knows what's going to happen in January. But yeah. Bit of realism as well, but let's see what happens.
Lads, Avon, did you have a question?
Do you know what? I was half debating whether to ask it or not, because it's a bit of an unusual one, and Chris may not know the answer, but I was just interested in his thoughts. Really, it was around just after the takeover that happened, Chris. Like obviously, Vichy mentioned, about Immobile and all players like that we were linked with. We also got linked with Wesley Fofana from Leicester. Now, obviously, he's got a really bad injury at the moment. Yeah, no, Pete loves him, absolutely loves him, and he's a top centre back. And I just hope that he comes back well, from the injury that he's had. But do you think there's anything in that? Because it surprised me that his name was one of the first players that got mentioned, and I thought, isn't that odd? Because he's currently recovering from a really serious injury. And do you think he's someone, probably not now because he's still injured, but do you think he is a name that maybe is on the radar, maybe possibly for the summer if we manage to stay up?
Yeah, it did seem a bit of a surprise in one at the time. I mean, I don't know specifically on him in terms of interest. What I would say is that there seems to be, certainly in France, and I don't know if my suspicion and certain people in and around the game suggest to me this is probably got a basis of truth, is that there's basically a lingering sort of connection between Newcastle and France from the period where they did so much business in that country, and so the sort of links there between Fofana's history and then Newcastle. That's where I suspect these things come from, and so you quite often see a lot of links in the French press with Newcastle and players out there, and they do still. Some of the scouts and the recruitment team who work at Newcastle still have some connections out there, and so I think that's where some of the stories maybe come from. I don't know if that's where the Fofana story came from. I don't know whether there is basis in that or not, but yeah, I found that interesting at the time as well, and I think he would be, once he recovers from his injury, a very, very good signing. Although at the minute you'd wonder why he would switch Leicester for bottom of the table to Newcastle. But
yeah.
He did.
I'm born and bred in Leicester. I know I'd choose Newcastle United all day long. And I tell you what, like I work in education. There's a lot of academy players that come through the ranks, one of which was Shay Adams. He came through the school that I work at, and I still get to speak to him now and again. And every time I speak to him, I say, why are you not at St. James's Park? Why are you not playing for us? And all the lads, when they make it big, I say, look, when you make it big, remember Newcastle United. When you have the list of clubs, you choose Newcastle United. So no different for Wesley Fofana. Yeah, okay, Leicester doing well, but the richest club in the world will be there eventually, whether it's now, 5, 7, 10 years' time. Invest yourself in the richest club in the world. That's what I say anyway.
And Chris, I was just going to follow on with that actually, with what you said about the rumours that you get from France for the links, because of we've had from like Kabay, Debussy, Sissoko, and all them lot. Is that a similar sort of thing with the rumour that a player that both me and Pete really like from Marseille, Boubacar Kamara, because obviously he was linked in the summer, and obviously I think he was a bit unsure of the project at the time, should we say, under Steve Bruce and stuff like that. And yeah. I know he's had a good start of the season at Marseille, but over the last few weeks he's been finding himself on the bench. Is that because he's perhaps a little bit unsettled now that there might be the transfer window's coming up, wants to keep himself fit for a potential move? I don't know if you've heard anything on that front.
I haven't heard anything recently in terms of on the likelihood of Newcastle going back from. They were definitely in for him in the summer. That was someone who they were very interested in. I mean, that was quite a complex situation because you had the club initially were very keen on, as in the club, by that I mean the previous regime were initially very keen on Kamara and had been for a long while, and Steve Bruce was maybe looking at other targets. And then by the end of the window, because Steve Bruce thought he was attainable, Bruce was very keen on him. By that stage, the club had basically decided, primarily because they'd agreed to bring in Willock, that they weren't going to spend any money in bringing Kamara. So he was caught up in that strange sort of situation as well, where there was everyone's sort of stance on the transfer at Newcastle had sort of flipped, and it was from one side to the other. But I think he did take some confidence. I think he was surprised in the summer there wasn't interest from, I don't want to say a bigger club, but clubs who are doing better in the current situation that they're in, rather than Newcastle's squad side who'd been in a relegation battle for several years and at the time were still owned by Mike Ashley. I think he thought that he may have got some European clubs coming in for him, and they didn't show enough concrete interest. So, as I say, I'm not entirely sure what the position is going into January. I know he is still a player Newcastle like, and he is somewhere in terms of a list of targets they've kept watching, but whether he is high up the list for someone who could come in, he would seem to fit the bill in many ways in terms of being quite comfortable on the ball, being able to play in a couple of different positions, being tactically very savvy, which is something that Eddie Howe likes. Also technically very good, which is something he likes in players. But I don't know exactly what the situation is going to January with him, I'm afraid.
I just think he's one of those. I was going to say, from Kamara, it fits into that mold of what Newcastle were looking at. Last 6 months of the contract. Like the bid 15 million in the summer. So, you're looking at probably 10, possibly 50 million tops to get him now anyway. I just think it's another astute possible buy with, as you've mentioned, he's good on the ball, he's tactically aware, he's physically strong to play numerous positions. So it seems to tick the boxes that Eddie Howe likes. It's just whether he likes him as the player himself. That's the thing.
Yeah, it does. And I suppose it also comes down to whether they just decide that position is somewhere where they do actually need Premier League experience, or whether they can bring in someone like Kamara because he's worth persisting beyond this season, even if it didn't necessarily work out for keeping them in the immediate and short term. So I think it also depends on availability of other players in terms of these players on lists. Someone who may at the moment they may be looking at thinking, I'm not entirely sure, we'll go for X, Y, or Z instead, may then become the top target because they're attainable, because the price is there, because Newcastle's priorities change. So, it'll be interesting to see if he does feature again in January.
Sorry, Yvonne, you were going to say something.
Yeah, sorry. Very last football French transfer question. Seeing as though we're on the topic, but
Love it.
I would love to know, in your opinion, you may know the answer, Chris, or you may know for fact, but in your opinion, let's say, do you think that Soumare 35 million transfer offer went in, or did it not? Because
smoke screen.
Yeah.
This is a very niche French football.
It is, isn't it? Yeah, it is.
I didn't think it was. Fascinating. This
Graham Carr sponsors the show.
Well, the Soumare stuff was very weird because that was sort of Bruce leaked it basically in a press conference without saying exactly who it was, and then the story sort of came out. I mean, my reading of the situation, and I don't want to say this is fact, but this is based on information. This is supposition from that, but having spoken to a lot of people in and around it, is I do think that the bid went in. But I also think it was a bid that Newcastle knew was never going to be successful, or suspected was highly unlikely to be successful. And so it was to an extent a testing of the waters, but also something that they could then say, well, we did put in this, but look at how ambitious we were. We went to try and sign this player. And that's because he did sort of, it's almost like the sort of Joe Linton deal at the time, where they're financially justified to themselves that over the deal would be worth it because Soumare would potentially come in and be worth 60 or 70 million. But equally, Soumare was never likely to come, and in the end, obviously, he didn't want to come, and that wasn't going to happen in that sense. But I think that they were surprised when the bid was accepted. Yeah. And then when the bid was accepted, it was sort of, oh, okay. And then obviously he didn't then accept himself. So that is, as I say, I'm not saying that's fact, but that is from information and from having spoken to people in and around it, and subsequently hearing about certain things. That is my sort of reading of that one.
I reckon that's why he told Alan St. Maximin to show him the training ground on his phone, and then when he's done that, he's gone, nah, you're all right.
You just see the call ending very quickly.
Yeah, thanks, bye.
That'll be on our friends Newcastle in UFC 360 now later on. That quote from Chris. But let's move on, lads, and from the football manager talk, because no one knows what's going to happen. We have to wait till January. Not long to wait now, lads. Only a couple of weeks. Let's go focus on. And I know, Chris, you could be running short on time. But the Burnley game. Who would you start for that game tomorrow? would you start? Fetty?
I definitely would start Fetty. Yeah, I can't see how you can't play Fernandez. I think it was what I thought he brought more than anything was a sort of calmness to the rest of the team, and it's almost like they look around at him, and it feels he always seems to be in the right position. He always seems to be sort of serene in terms of what he's doing. His temperament's there, and I just thought it brought a calmness which I haven't seen from the defense in a long while. So I can't see how you can take him out of the team after what he did the other day. I've been speaking to various different people today, and I've sort of been debating in my own mind whether it makes sense to switch to a back three because of the threat that Burnley will bring, and that you could have someone like the Cells back in the side in a three and basically just tell them you just mark Wood today. You just make sure you do everything there. I don't want you to do anything else. Then you can keep Cher in there to be able to give the sort of football element, have the Fernandez sort of solidity. And then it can almost be like the attacking 3-4-3 system, which was shown against Brentford, just playing a slightly different way to make sure that you've got the three centre-backs to counter Burnley, who will likely have two larger strikers up top, two physical strikers, and it's to sort of combat what is rare in the Premier League nowadays. So it'll be interesting to see how he does approach it. I don't know whether he will switch to a back three, because I think ideally he wants to play primarily with a back four, but at Bournemouth he did sometimes change things around, and for someone like Burnley, for that threat that they do bring, it may make sense. Benitez would often even before he switched to a three, eventually would often switch to a three at the back against Burnley when he was Newcastle manager for those very reasons.
Cool. Well, I hope if Lascelles does come back that he turns off his X-ray vision there for the game. Stop waving to people in the crowd. It's not going to work. Then yes, was Lewis. I'd stick with Lewis as well. And let me bring up the team just so everyone is from the last day.
I mean, I would stick with Jamal Lewis as well. I think that he showed enough from it, and I think that he brings a bit more balance than the Matt Ritchie does in a defensive sense. I don't think Jamal Lewis by any stretch is the best defender, but I think because he's got that additional pace and the additional engine, he's able to get back and cover situations a bit more. In terms of that, I don't think I'd make mass changes elsewhere. Maybe I'm still not 100% comfortable with the balance of that midfield. I don't think it is quite right, and I don't think Joe Willock, even though I spoke to him yesterday, and he's still very confident in his own ability, he's still speaking with a lot of positivity. I don't think he's playing like a player who's at the top of his game. I think he's scratching around for form. He's searching for it too much, and I'd be tempted to potentially make a change there. I don't know exactly necessarily what I would do, because I don't think Isaac Hayden is going to bring what Eddie Howe would necessarily want in a home game. But then it is Burnley. You are going to have that extra physical element, and maybe Hayden can bring you a little something there. So the midfield would maybe be the one other area I'd be looking at to potentially change, because I'm not quite comfortable with that balance yet.
Yes, I saw somewhere on Twitter as well heat maps of Joe Willock, and just comparing last season to this season, and it was just last season you could see him making his way into the box, and it was red because obviously he scored a lot of goals there, the 8 goals at the end or something like that. But he hasn't even, it doesn't even look like he's got there that far this season. I suppose the tactics are playing, but you're right. He's not playing with that smile on his face that he did have at the end of last year. So interesting. See how it shapes up tomorrow.
I don't actually think we'd need to go to a back three, if I'm honest. I think Chris is right. Normally what Burnley would do is have the sort of battering rams, as I like to call them, the big physical guys, as you said, up front, which is normally Woods and Barnes. But Barnes is out for another few weeks. Sean Dyche confirmed in his presser. So he's only really got Woods up there. And actually, if you watch the game, back, and Dan talked to me and Chris about this on the away days, that there was a bit of an argument between Woods and Dyche, because Woods got taken off after 59 minutes because he was ineffective in the game against Wolves, because he was the only guy up front, really the big target man, but they easily marshalled him out the game. And so because the big physical element to the game wasn't really there. He became ineffective. So I think, potentially we could have that again. If Fernandes is there, yes, he's not maybe as big as Lascelles or maybe as fast as Lascelles, doesn't have that raw ability. But he knows how to defend. You don't play in the World Cup final for Argentina if you don't know how to defend. And he knows how to defend big guys like that. And I think if he can be in that team to nullify the likes of Woods, if he even starts, that is, I think that's a massive plus for us. And why sacrifice an extra centre back when you can have two centre backs that could maybe occupy Woods, and then you've got another guy that can move us forward. And that if he can move that guy forward into a midfield or a forward position, as the home team, you'd want the emphasis on that to push forward and try and score goals, which is the Eddie Howe way. That for me would be the way to go, and that would really kind of push Burnley back and put pressure on them.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think that the way that Newcastle approach the game, regardless of what the system is, as I think they will look to push Burnley back, and they'll look to take the game to them. The onus to be on Newcastle to try and create. And I think we even saw that in the first 9 minutes against Norwich. You could see what Newcastle were trying to do. They were trying to switch play. They were trying to get bodies in different areas. That three behind the striker was going to be fluid, and they were going to be moving around. Joe Linton started as the number 10, but I think that all of them were already moving around in terms of positions. And I think that we'll see something similar tomorrow. Howe will try and start quickly, and he'll very much play the game on the front foot, and hopefully that works, whether he sees that as being a 3-4-3, whether he sees it as being a 4-2-3-1 as it was the other day, a 4-4-1-1 as it was at all. So we've already seen him set up in a few different ways, and so it'll be interesting to see exactly how he believes that can get it best at Burnley tomorrow, and who makes up that sort of. I expect it to be the similar sort of players in terms of those attacking positions, but how exactly they line up, I'm fascinated to see.
Definitely.
Cheers, Chris. I think we'll bring it to a close. Chris, you promised us an hour. We've gone over the hour. Are you at the game tomorrow, Chris? Or is George on duty?
George is on duty because I'm actually at a wedding, so unfortunately I'm not there. So so George will be on duty. I gave him the Burnley game, so he's delighted by that. So
look at him. He's there. He's delighted. I can see it. I can see it. But yeah, no, Chris, thanks a million for coming on. Great to meet you. As I said at the start, I know I've been listening to you guys for years on the podcast, and I love it. And finally, nice to meet you. Martin sends his apologies. He couldn't be with us tonight. He's in his shed, I'm sure, drinking. New lockdown rules came into force into Ireland in the next few days. Well, not lockdown, but more restrictions. So he's crying into his beer tonight. But thanks a million for coming on, Chris, and enjoy the game tomorrow. Bring on those 3 points.
Pleasure. Yes, thanks, guys. Let's hope that it's finally a win this weekend. Finally.
Definitely.
Nice one. And everyone watching, make sure to hit that subscribe button and hit that like button. You know what to do at this stage. You know where to go. I'm not going to bore you to tears telling you about that. But that's it. We'll bring it to a close. And if we do win tomorrow, we're coming back and doing a review show. We have to if we win our first game. I don't care. All right, Chris. Thanks a million. Take care. Thanks, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Cheers, Chris.